Hey everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's episode, many ServiceNow instances have been leaking data online. Also, several announcements were made during the IGEL Disrupt event held in Munich, Germany this week. And a vulnerability patched in this month's Patch Tuesday is now being exploited. For this and more, keep listening to this episode of the podcast, which of course, as always, is brought to you by my sponsors. And that includes Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. Then of course also brought to you by Master Packager, who make an application packaging software that helps you build packages that end users love, enterprises want, and the Windows OS needs. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. IGEL Disrupt was held this week in Munich, Germany, and there were several announcements made by IGEL and some of the IGEL partners at the event, including the fact the Island Enterprise browser has now been added to the IGEL app portal. I've talked about the Island browser and Island IO on several episodes of the podcast, and it seems to be a solution that is growing in strength, and certainly the company has been growing in evaluation quite steadily over the last 18 months or so. And certainly, a secure browser does make a whole lot of sense on these thin client operating systems. Another partnership announcement was the availability of Citrix Secure Access Agent, which is a key component of Citrix Security Private Access, being integrated into the IGEL OS to provide ZTNA to all private applications. With this integration, you can transition users from VPN to ZTNA to enable least privilege access and enforce continuous security for your hybrid workforce. Citrix Secure Access Agent is a pre-verified application in the IGEL app portal that you can seamlessly deploy on IGEL OS. This integration offers some benefits, including automated provisioning of Citrix Secure Access Agent into IGEL OS devices, contextual access policies based on device posture, identity, location, and device type checks, continuous enforcement and dynamic revocation of access, simplified management and observability, and more. IGEL also had 2 app-related announcements of their own. One is a move away from requiring custom partitions to install custom applications into the IGEL OS, which has always been a little bit of a pain in the butt as an administrator, or at least in my opinion, working with IGEL OS and UMS in the past. IGEL have explained that with OS 12, it's moving to a modular design, meaning the base OS is kept to a minimum and does not come with any pre-installed apps, only the OS itself. Applications such as the AVD client or Chromium browsers can be downloaded and installed onto the base OS either manually or via the UMS. Of course, customers can select applications from the IGEL app portal, which has certified applications developed and maintained by IGEL and their ready partners. And at the time of this recording, they say there's 50 applications available in the app portal ready for use. They also have a program available for customers to submit their own Linux applications with a relatively simple process, although it does require signing. So yeah, customers probably more likely that it's going to be partners who are submitting these applications. IGEL also announced a distributed app repository where customers can host applications on a local or on-premises system that hosts IGEL applications within their own network environment, enabling optimal application performance and the potential for access in offline and low bandwidth environments. What they seem to mean by offline is not internet connected, but rather still network connected to an internal network. Otherwise, how are you going to be able to get to the applications if they're hosted on some other storage? They also announced a digital signature app for providing resiliency, security, and validation by only allowing trusted code to execute, which does also mean when you choose to submit an application for the portal, like I said, you must go through a signing process, which, it's not a bad thing. It is a major positive because it enforces validation and security. Interestingly, I saw that during the event, Citrix announced a Mac OS VDA. So that would be pretty cool because you'll be able to provide macOS virtual desktops in the future, and also the possibility of having physical macOS machines being able to with remote PC access, which I guess will become remote access because it's not necessarily a PC, I guess. There was no date shared for when it's going to be released or available, but it seems to be coming soon. Microsoft has announced with the upcoming October Windows updates, all Windows 11 version 22H2 and higher devices that are enrolled with an MDM, for example Microsoft Intune, will automatically download and install quality updates during the OOBE, so that out-of-box experience. This will apply to all MDM enrolled devices, regardless of whether they're pre-registered with Windows Autopilot or not. The updates will be applied before the user reaches the desktop, ensuring that the device is fully patched before logging in. Of course, the trade-off here, especially with those autopilot devices, is going to be slowness. So yeah, it's obviously going to be a major boon and benefit to have the machines fully patched before users log in, but it also means time to having a fully logged in desktop is going to be longer. MacRumors.com has reported that demand for the iPhone 16 Pro and iPhone 16 Pro Max has been lower than expected. It's estimated that sales of all 4 iPhone 16 models reached about 37 million units in the first weekend after Apple had begun accepting pre-orders, which is down nearly 13% compared to the first weekend of sales for the iPhone 15 series last year. An analyst said a key factor for the decline is the lower demand for the Pro models, with first weekend sales of the iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max estimated to be down 27% and 16% respectively compared to the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max. As standard, iPhone 16 and iPhone 16 Plus have seen higher demand than the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus during the first weekend of sales, but this has not been enough to offset the lower demand for the Pro models. It was speculated that this trend may be due to the fact that the Apple Intelligence features are not going to be rolled out until October, so people may be holding off until closer to then. So I'm on my first iPhone ever. It's an iPhone 13. I may upgrade, but I'd rather not upgrade. These phones are expensive, and to be fair to it, the battery life is still pretty good on my iPhone 13. It's just starting to have a few quirks, like not charging properly and some buttons don't work all the time, which to be fair also happened with my Samsung and my HTC as well. But all that to say, I wouldn't be too hard pressed to update to the iPhone 16 if it wasn't just for hardware issues. So maybe other people who got the iPhone 15 or the iPhone 14 are just not ready to update either. I guess we'll have to see if what is stated by MacRumors.com is true and the Apple Intelligence features will kind of turn the screw and get people to upgrade to those higher end phones. Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger released a press release to address the future of Intel, stating Intel and the Intel board have a lot of work ahead to drive greater efficiency, improve profitability, and enhance the market competitiveness. And there are 3 key takeaways from a meeting that took place last week that he wants Intel to focus on. That is 1, build on their momentum in Foundry as they near the launch of Intel 18A and drive greater capital efficiency across this part of their business. 2, act with urgency to create a more competitive cost structure and deliver the $10 billion in savings targets that were announced last month. And 3, refocus on their strong x86 franchise as they drive AI strategy while streamlining their product portfolio and service to Intel customers and partners. He went on to discuss some of the positive recent developments in the company, such as their partnership with AWS on Intel Foundry, receiving a US Secure Enclave Award, and more. So it's certainly been difficult times for Intel. Personally, reading this, I don't take away too much optimism from the press release. I think they're going to have to make some pretty drastic changes and bold moves to regain some ground. CVE-2024-43461, which is a Windows MS HTML spoofing vulnerability that was disclosed as part of the September Windows updates, has had its status updated. When first reported, this was a vulnerability that had not been exploited, but there is now an update stating that it has been exploited. As it turns out, it has been used by a cyber gang known as Void Banshee APT Hacking Group. The vulnerability was paired together with CVE-2024-38112, which was patched back in July, and used as part of an attack chain. In the attack, attackers used special Windows Internet Shortcut files, or URL files, which, when clicked, would call the retired Internet Explorer to visit the attacker-controlled URL. These URLs were used to download a malicious HTA file and prompt the user to open it. When opened, a script would run to install an info stealer. Interestingly, the September vulnerability that was disclosed is being used to hide the HTA file extension and make the file appear as though it's a PDF. BleepComputer.com reported that by using Braille whitespace characters, it pushed the HTA extension outside of the user interface, only delineating it by a ... string. This caused the HTA files to appear as PDF files, making them more likely to be opened by users. So a pretty interesting vulnerability using white spaces to mimic a different file type and trick users. Speaking of recent vulnerabilities and patches, conspicuous by its absence this week is reports of issues that were caused by the recent Windows updates. The only reports I saw were actually about a known issue with the August patches, so probably one of those organizations that stays a month behind on their patches, which that is a ballsy approach in this day and age. A quick peruse of the sysadmin subreddit and patch management mail group reads for some optimism that it is going to be a quiet month, so fingers crossed. Unfortunately, there was another AVD outage recently. This outage seemed to impact the US East region for over an hour, with people reporting they got a 404 error when browsing via the web and being unable to access desktops. And this comes just a week after a similar issue was experienced with AVD. Over 1,000 misconfigured ServiceNow enterprise instances were found exposing knowledge base articles that contain sensitive corporate information to external users and potential threat actors. The exposed information included personally identifiable information, internal system details, user credentials, access tokens for live production systems, and other essential information depending on the KB topic. After a 2023 report by Costello on ServiceNow data exposure, ServiceNow moved to roll out a security update that introduced new ACLs to prevent unauthenticated access to customer data. However, App Omni says that most ServiceNow KBs utilize the user criteria permission system rather than the ACLs, making the update less than useful. Furthermore, some public-facing widgets that expose customer information did not receive the 2023 ACL update and continue to allow unauthenticated access. For their part, ServiceNow said that they did reach out to inform customers of how to properly secure their information, and said that as of September 4th, they moved to take a proactive action designed to address customers' KB configurations as appropriate. Honestly, ServiceNow is pretty much ubiquitous now with ITSM in enterprises, so this is going to be a big headline grabber. Particularly, BleepyComputer.com is reporting that this affected over 1,000 ServiceNow instances. But I've worked in organizations who used different ticketing systems and also other ITSMs in the past, where they tried to make them available externally because customers or employees who are trying to gain remote access may need to submit a ticket from a device that's not a business device and on the network. But there was also a risk of then exposing some of that data publicly, and it has happened in places that I've worked in the past, so I don't think this is unique to ServiceNow, but it's definitely a threat that needs to be addressed. It has been widely reported this week that AWS will require employees to return to the office 5 days a week starting in January. And as you may expect, it has not gone down too well with many of their employees, with Fortune.com featuring an article with someone saying that they would request from their manager to be put on a PIP or performance improvement plan with a view to getting let go. So there's been some pretty extreme reactions to this, and it is kind of a disappointment. It seems like we're in the dying stages of an acceptance of remote work, which is a shame because it was one of the few wins for modern employees in this modern workplace of ours. So it is disappointing, and I'm sure it could also be, the cynic in me is saying it could also be AWS trying to get people to jump so they don't have to make them redundant. But yeah, like I said, that's just my cynical part. I figured I'd better do a follow-up on the Boeing Starliner debacle since I made the foolish decision to cover it in the past when there was a story related to it possibly being addressed and fixed with a software update. So I was like, oh, there's an angle that I could cover on the podcast. Well, now I'm in it, so a quick update. It had seemed that NASA successfully got the spacecraft to return to Earth safely without the astronauts aboard. However, it now appears the decision to not have the astronauts return was the correct one, as there was reportedly damage to more of the parts on the spacecraft after re-entry other than the infamous thrusters. The capsule also experienced a temporary blackout of Starliner's guidance system during re-entry. NASA held a press conference recently, and interestingly, Boeing employees who were scheduled to take part in the panel withdrew shortly before it began with no reason given. So a further black eye to the reputation of Boeing. I think it would have been better if they just were there and took the difficult questions. Even if it didn't look good, it would look better than pulling out at short notice. According to TechCrunch.com, in the next few months, Google will begin to flag AI-generated and edited images in the About This Image window on Search, in Google Lens, and in the Circle to Search feature on Android devices. Similar disclosures may make their way to other Google properties like YouTube in the future, and Google says it'll have more information to share on this later this year. Ars Technica had a report on a really interesting problem. The entertainment industry largely moved to using hard disk drives over tape for backups in the 90s, as did many enterprises. But Iron Mountain estimates that roughly 1/5 of the hard disk drives dating back to the 90s that it was sent are entirely unreadable. And this means the musicians and studios who are now digging into their archives in order to remaster original tracks find that they are unable to restore them. The advice or tip given in this article is do not trust any medium for your backups. So you need to copy important things over and over again into fresh storage on a continuous basis. I could only imagine if you're an artist and you put so much time into creating this track or this song that resonated with people and brings back big memories of you making your break and probably making millions of dollars, and then you go to try and restore the original version and you can't. It's gotta be so heartbreaking. So yeah, heed the advice on continuous backups onto new medium. Another really interesting report from Ars Technica was suggesting that an AI hobbyist discovered that an image synthesis model called Flux is able to reproduce someone's handwriting very accurately and was even used to reproduce text in JAR Token's handwriting. But also, the Ars Technica reporter fed it the journals left behind by his dad who passed away and got it to write in his dad's distinctive penmanship. He goes into the morals and ethical questions about this in the article and shares some of the results and other thoughts. So I'm not going to give it away. I suggest that you check out this article for yourself if you're interested, and you can find the link to it at 5bytespodcast.com with this episode, which is episode 352. And now, this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. First tip is probably coming a bit too late for most, but AVD Tech Fest is going to be held next week in Amsterdam, and tickets are pretty cheap. I think they're just over 70 euros. So if you happen to be in Europe, somewhere that's easily connected to Amsterdam, next Tuesday and Wednesday, you can check out AVD Tech Fest. There's some great speakers lined up, and I'll also be there as well if you happen to be there. I'll be at the Numescent booth in the exhibition hall, so come by and say hello, or also you can check out my session on Wednesday afternoon. Last tip for today comes from Martin Himken via Twitter, who said that if you have a domain that was once called workgroup, Entra-Join only is a really bad idea because it will brick the device. It won't even launch or log in safe mode. The workaround is to move the device to a different workgroup once it's no longer called workgroup. Then the device will work normally again. There's nothing in the event logs that makes this obvious, and apparently nothing with boot logging enabled either. So it seems highly unlikely that someone's going to name a domain workgroup, so hopefully no one actually encounters this, but I thought it was an interesting tip nonetheless. Well, that's it for this episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for listening.